Okay, so today I will present you parts of my recently completed PhD dissertation. It's a research that looked at airports as driver of urbanization on territorial scales, with Singapore-Changi Airport as the main case. So before starting, as an urban designer and architect, I'm actually interested in what happens outside of the fence of the airport, how cities and airport interact, and how large territories are being shaped when located in the catchment area of a globally linked hub. So Changi is known as one of the best airports in the world, and the images usually associated with it are the ones of a modern international hub. And this is also illustrated in the new projects that are currently under construction, such as Terminal 4, which is near completion. Sorry, there you go. Which is near completion. It has been dubbed the terminal of the future, with extensive use of self-service check-in and bag-tagging machine for the passengers of tomorrow. There is obviously Terminal 5, yes, which is Singapore's next mega project. It will be bigger than the 4 terminals combined and will double the airport capacity by end of 2020. And there is, of course, the famous project Jewel, which is essentially a new mall that will connect the 3 first terminals together. It will add new retail space to the airport, but also a new arrival space. It's designed by Shavdi Architects, and it will boost one of the bigger indoor gardens in the world and a giant waterfall. So what this research will show you today is that Changi is also this, when linked to a larger territorial scale. And these productive areas and the related people, but also the passenger, have or should have a profound impact in how airports are designed. So although I looked at Changi at different scale, from looking at the public space catalyst that it is for its city residents, to how the airport closer periphery has been developing, and to, of course, looking at airport-related urbanization at the city region scale, it is at this larger territorial scale that I want to focus today. And it will hopefully help to introduce the slight broader lenses and frame that our specific panel has today. So I will be joined by Max, Alex, and Andrew later on to talk about the similar issues. So the red boundary on this map shows you Changi Flight Information Region, which is basically the airspace control of the airport. When Changi opened in 1981, this red boundary used to be even bigger and incorporate, the area of the Johor state in Malaysia. So if since 1981 Malaysia has successfully regained control of all of its of all of its airspace, the one above the Indonesian island of the Riau, just south of Singapore, remain under Singapore control since 1946. And this has deprived Indonesian airports to freely add new routes, or has deprived them of income on route charges. So I find this enlightening because it's an unusual illustration of the well-known powers and dependencies that are happening in this larger territory. So just to give you a short background on that, Singapore, again, no, this? Sorry, what have I done? Singapore has gone beyond the border, and every day you have over 60,000 people crossing the border to Singapore for better work, better wages, but also better healthcare, better education. And in turn, Singapore is highly dependent on its cross-border region for food, water. Around 85% of the water that is consumed in Singapore comes from Johor, also for productive land area, as well as human capital. And the Changi FER can be read as another administrative border which enables the airport and therefore Singapore to extend its control across this larger territory. So, Sorry. So I basically used airport infrastructure to broader the cross-border perspective of Singapore, and to question how this larger territory is being redesigned to facilitate the production and global circulation of people and goods. So what are the flows articulated by Changi? How far do they go in this larger territory? How do people and goods move to reach the airport? Which are other secondary airports or more informal modes of transport involved, etc. So I won't bore you with the theoretical framework of my dissertation, but just to give you a bit of points on how the research was conducted and why. So my assumption was that Changi Airport region was shaped by flows that jumped across the border. So for me, and by people, who connected these flows back together. So for me, the understanding of the organization of this airport region became equally important. So most of my research took place on site, in flows of air passenger, but also logistic firms and smaller airplanes, and at key logistic hubs and passenger terminal, border checkpoints and productive areas. So one of the reasons is that due to national security, or let's say red tape reasons, the airport authority, as well as other authorities in Singapore, were rather reluctant to share data. And I realized that in Singapore, doing my research the official way was rather time-consuming. So when I understood the airport as linked by different actors through its surroundings, things started to become clearer. So to narrow the scope of my fieldwork, I concentrated on transnational flows likely to generate a stronger impact on the built environment, so flows of cargoes and passenger, and I isolated the ones that were specific to Singapore's particular condition. So I'll focus this presentation on the flows of cargo, but just to give you a short example of the passengers' case studies, I researched international tourists landing at Changi to combine Singapore's world city urban experience with a vacation in the tropical paradises of the SIJORI region. So SIJORI stands for Singapore-Johor-Riau. So following the 1990s tourism plan of collective attractiveness by the Singapore Tourism Board, tropical paradises located just across the border were incorporated to mitigate Singapore's lack of original landscape, given its primarily industrialized coastline. So the specific geopolitical condition of Singapore produced this cross-border tourist flow. So Bintan International Resort, located here in the Indonesian island of Bintan, has 70% of its clients that are international tourists traveling through Changi. The key markets are China, Korea, Japan, and Indonesia. And Indonesian, funnily, fly through Changi because it's easier to access than the airport of Bintan. And they reach the enclave within a short 45 minutes ferry ride from Singapore. And there they are taken in charge by a resort assistant. The Bintanese landscape has been completely transformed through the use of specific spatial typology, such as border delimitation, etc. The next phase of the master plan is under construction. So finally, Changi Airport Group has claimed his gateway to Bintan condition through several collaborations with Bintan resorts, such as discounted rates on the resort facility for Singapore Airline passengers, or combined transit shopping voucher for Chinese and Indian visitors. So I'll come back to other passenger case studies at the end of this presentation. So researching cargo, I found that Changi supports urban development across its national border by helping local small and medium enterprises of perishable goods, as well as multinational corporations of high-value electronics to expand their commercial activities across border. So, of course, air freight, being extremely expensive, only caters for very specific goods, such as perishable, electronics, works of arts, etc. And these commodities are key for Changi. Perishable, for example, are part of the top 10 commodities handled by the airport. And in 2010, Changi opened Coolport, a dedicated perishable terminal. Since then, the volumes of perishable cargo have increased by a factor of 10. So to start with the peripheral flow, so the Malaysian state of Johor is home to over 100 Singaporean-owned orchids and ornamental fish farms. Following the phasing out of agriculture production in the 70s, these Singaporean family-run companies relocated their production fields in Johor rural hinterlands, while maintaining their parent farm in one of Singapore's 6 agro-technological centers, which are located here. So in Singapore, these agro-technological centers are high-tech estates dedicated to the production of export-oriented commodities. 65% of all land in this estate is occupied by orchids and aquarium fish, and only 2% to the production of food. So the larger orchid farm in Johor are about 50 times bigger than their bases in Singapore. The main concentration of farm is found within 100 kilometers from Changi Airport. In addition, the specific organization of their networks consolidate in one farm the goods of other subsidiaries, further expanding the airport catchment area. Every day, local logistic firms truck these so-called made-in-Singapore goods across the border to the cool port before being flown tax-free to wholesale distributors around the world. So the same goes for aquarium fish. Singapore is the ornamental fish capital of the world. With 83% of the country total production, the state of Johor in Malaysia is the biggest producer of aquarium fish in Malaysia, largely due to its proximity to Changi Airport. So after being bred in the extensive farms, the fish are trucked tax-free across the border, where they are prepared and packed for air transport in Singapore Agro-Technological Park. So in addition, fish from all over the world are flown through Changi to Singaporean farms. The actual overwhelming majority, which is 95% of these farms' yield, both for fish and orchids, is sold abroad. So this is the export destination for the orchids case study. So to finish with the airfreight electronic trade, so since Singapore manufacturing regionalization in the 90s, the firms, the multinational corporations, remain headquartered in Singapore and are linked through production chain with the neighboring territory of SIJORI. The island of Batam in the Riau is a well-known base for multinational corporation. In 2011, the electronics ranked as the highest export commodity per value in Batam. After the high-tech components are produced abroad, they are shipped to Batam for assembly. The circulation of these small components centers on Changi and is supported by 2 secondary airports, Seletar in Singapore and Hang Nadim in Batam. Batamindo is the first pioneer and most notorious industrial estate. It hosts over 70 multinational corporations coming from Europe and the States, but also the region. It's conveniently located 15 minutes away from its port and its airport. It's a 320 hectares park managed by Galan Venture, the same Indonesian and Singaporean consortium that built Bintan Resort. It's master plan in a Singapore style, as you can see, and as a self-sufficient infrastructure with housing, dormitories, town center, etc. So Batamindo biggest tenant is the German company Infineon, a leader in semiconductor manufacturing. Infineon exemplifies the global chain of production with high-skilled front-end factory linked via air freight to back-end manufacturing production, such as the factory in Batamindo. So to conclude, what are the key points that we can learn from these cargo case studies for a symposium such as today? Well, obviously, these airport-related regional flows have an urbanizing effect on this larger territory, up to 150 kilometers across the border. So the airport can be seen as one of the central factors of significant urbanization of Singapore's hinterland. But of course, this urbanization effect is multi-causal. So, for example, these regional flows are a direct illustration of, among many other parameters, various extraterritorial policies that were implemented by Singapore from the 70s onward, such as manufacturing regionalization, agrarian phasing out, but also tourism regionalization, as I mentioned before. And to acknowledge the multi-causality of airport urbanism process is crucial. Successful airport-related urban development do not come from the airport alone. This question existing models such as the well-known Aerotropolis by John Casarda. The Aerotropolis is a monocausal build and grow with calm optimism. Its focus on airport positive economic impact reveals a certain bias of intentions, most of all when used by airport operators. In addition, the fact that it is used as blueprint everywhere, regardless of the contextual specificities, does not offer practical guidelines for sustainable growth. In fact, it's a model that is therefore more useful to airport operators than to urban planners. And despite the globalized design trends on airport terminal, this research shows you that the airport has a specific contextual relationship with its surrounding, depending on geographical, historical, political conditions, and so on. And actually, in one of my PhD chapters, I show how the close periphery of Singapore Airport portrays the condition of a dead-end area. Which until recently few airport-related development in comparison to the ones that take place at the city regional scale. Sorry, I'm almost done. So the final point is that this cargo network illustrates that airports rely on local operators and widespread network, both formal and self-organized, and that part of the story is usually less known of Changi. As such, Changi is one of the key forces linking back the three countries' territories together. So this brings me back to the final part of the presentation, which includes the smaller airports on the fringe of Singapore international border, and I'll finish talking about other passengers' case studies. So the economic gradient between Singapore and its neighboring region has started to generate a trade in cross-border traffic for passengers on both sides of the border who take advantage of cheaper regional fare in SIJORI secondary airports, so Senai in Johor and Hang Nadim in Batam. So being located right next to Singapore, they have developed transport infrastructure through partnership with budget airlines and local transport operator to offer air and bus combination from Senai or air and ferry combination from Hang Nadim to access Singapore. So, of course, these cross-border passenger flows are still insignificant, a few thousand a month, in comparison to Changi's market share of over 4 million passengers for May 2015 only. However, the SIJORI region is evolving. The state of Johor, sorry, that's PowerPoint. The state of Johor embraces the special economic zone of Iskandar, Malaysia, which is here. Senai was one of the fastest growing airport in Asia in 2013, with 44% of growth in passenger. Looking at Indonesia and the Riau Island, in 2019, Singapore will hand over to Indonesia the airspace that it still controls above the Riau Island. And the rearrangement of air traffic may spur the development of the secondary airport. For example, the tourist-oriented Bintan International Airport here is currently being built by the same Gallant Venture Consortium that built Batam and Bintan Resort. It will be located 25 minutes away from the resort and will cater for charter tourist passenger coming from India and China. So that's the state of the airport development in 2014, but it has since then evolved pretty quickly. As these airports grow, their role in supporting the already existing many cross-border activities could become more important for the region's future development. And However, there is a clear disconnect between intense on-the-ground private firm collaboration on one hand, as illustrated in the goods case study, and lack of governmental integration on the other. For this emerging budget network, for example, the Civil Aviation Authority of Singapore still limits the collaboration with the secondary airport on the fringe for protectionist or competitive reasons. Successful example can be found in Hong Kong, as Max Hirsch may expand on later. Hong Kong Airport has expanded its passenger catchment area by running cross-border buses and ferries directly from the terminal to mainline Chinese airport across the border to Shenzhen. Implementing similar cross-border mechanism in Singapore could develop an airport system that may be regarded as a stepping stone for a common regional urban vision for SIJORI, once surpassing the current localized development strategies. So if this can be considered as yet another hypothesis of research, I can nevertheless conclude with how such approach to airport urbanism research offer ground to influence airport design, as hinged at the beginning of my presentation. So although Changi Airport Group resisted until recently to recognize the importance of their closed region for future growth, the design of Terminal 5 and its direct periphery was recently modified to incorporate better connection with SIJORI. Since it's still a confidential project, I'm not allowed to say more, but hopefully next time. Thank you.